didn't have enough business with land. But anyway, the railroads, the Orange Alexandria and Manassas Gap Railroad Company started laying tracks from northern Virginia up through the valley. And they got in the vicinity of Mount Jackson in about 1858, and they knew the Civil War was getting ready to start, so they just stopped construction. And then after the war was over in 1865, well, then they finished the railroad, and then December the 11th, 1868, the first train came through Timberville, on through Broadway, on to Harrisonburg. And I think back then, the train companies must have had to bid on who was going to provide service. Is the only thing I could, because the Orange Alexandria operated till 1873, and then the B&O took over, and they operated till 1896. And then the Southern Railway took over, and the Southern Railway was notorious for having poor service. And so they operated on up through the Second World War, and but during the Second World War, they stopped the passenger service, but of course the freight trains kept running, of course. And give me a minute. All right, after the Second World War was over, they tried to start in 1947. They tried to start the passenger service back up again, and it only lasted about 6 months, and it just failed, because I think by then almost all families had vehicles, so people wasn't riding the train like they used to back in the early 1900s. And so January 4th, 1948, was the last passenger train. I think left Harrisonburg and came through Timberville on to northern Virginia on January 4th. And that was the last passenger train through town. And of course, the freight trains ran years longer than that. And now we'll go to the Miller Jones store. Oh, well, the train. Oh, the first depot was built in 1868 when the first train came through, and then they allocated money. That had been the Southern train in 1910. They allocated money for the new depot, and that's the one that we remember, and that was torn down in 1974. Now the Miller Jones store, I would say, was across the street, and that's down where the rubble is. There's the train tracks from the bowling alley and Garrett Circle, which is an alley, and then they're on the corner where the limestone rubble's at now. That Miller Jones store started there in 1912. In 1918, Charlie Kipps bought the Miller Jones store and became Kipps' store. And they operated there until 1948 when Charlie got sick, and so they had he had a house out in the north end of town. How to put this? And he was my aunt and uncle. He married my dad's sister. Everybody knew Aunt Claire, whether he was related to her or not. And so they moved to the Kipps' store in '48 out to a barn behind their house, and opened Kipps' store there. And that way she could still keep store and walk up through the yard and take care of him. So that kind of sort of, but it didn't last because he died in 1948. But the store operated there until 1972, and it burned. And the reason it caught on fire, I wasn't going to go into the little details, but this is she had a big door. She'd go in the back of the store, and a great big swinging door, and she had a little stove back there. Where she cooked her meals and things, but that didn't have anything to do with fire. She had electricity, one of those green wound cords underneath this door, and over the years, that door coming back and forth, it wore the insulation off, and it set the building on fire. And of course, I've got the clock in my house running, but it partly burned that. But I got the clock out of Kipps' store, but that's what happened to that. That little cord underneath the door, it set the building on fire. Now we have the right across Garrett Circle, which I'd call the alley. Well, but before we get to the bowling alley, going straight up Garrett Circle, and that building back there, it's been a home for years now. That was the creamery, and the Timberville Creamery started in 1912, and Ezra Minnick was the first president, and June the 1st, 1913. They'd been open maybe a year. They had sold 56,000 pounds of butter. That's the only notation I have for that. We have a lot of other details about it, but now we go across the alley from Kip's store, and the bowling alley building sits there. I think that's where they have love sign now, right next to the railroad. Now that building was built in 1864, before the railroad came through. But they built it on purpose, the way I understand. It was going to be right next to the railroad track because they already knew where the railroad was going to be exactly. So somebody built that building there. They go unload the trains right into the building. You know, that's what you call foresight, I guess. And some of the businesses in the building, I didn't try to remember these. 1881, Roller Earhart and Company. They were dealers in notions, fancy goods, boots, shoes, hats, caps, groceries, hardware, queensware, and woodware. This is also 1880. Roller Earhart and Myers. Myers must have bought in. Dealers in general merchandise. 1886. Minnick and Earhart started in that building. General merchandise, fertilizers, feed, hay, and small farm equipment. Then John Grimm had a store in there from 1895 until 1909. Now he was the grandfather of all the Bowman kids we knew, like Fred and John and all those. He was their grandfather. And then in 1912, 1914, it was Zirkle and Garber. And they were dealers in agriculture, implement, standard fertilizers, flour, grain, and seed. That Zirkle was B.F. Zirkle, Benjamin Franklin Zirkle. He was the father of Mrs. Margaret Hinkle, that was all of our 6th grade school teacher. And the Garber was, if you remember Mrs. Height, that married B.W. Height in the bank. Well, that Garber was her father, so that's kind of where they belong. And 1941, Lester Hoover bought the building from his dad, John Hoover, and he converted it into a bowling alley. And they had a pool room on the upper floor. And Jerry Armourtrout ran it for years. And then our family, we ran it for in 1956, 57, and 58. And I'd never set pins before, but I mean, tell you, that's some of the hardest work I ever did. When we opened that day, it was on a Saturday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you had to shut down at midnight because of the blue laws back then. And I set pins, all those, and I'm in at 15 years old. On Sunday morning, I could hardly get out of bed. That's how bad it was. But of course, you get used to it like you do anything, I guess. But so then after it was shut down, I think it wasn't shut down empty very long until it was a Mr. Lamb from over at Elkton. He had the bowling alley in Elkton, and he came down and opened the bowling alley here in Timberville, and he's the one that put in the automatic pin setters. And for back in those days, those things worked pretty good. You'd think they broke down some, I think, but and on November the 4th, 1967, bowling alley burned. It's not there anymore.
Just before you got here. That's right.
Now right down in the main part of town, right around the bank building and the store and all, they had a horse sale, and that started in 1909. And my dad had this recorded in his diaries, and some months they would sell 75 horses in one day. I think the Timberville horse sale was always on a Friday once a month. And I think the Harrisonburg court days, I think that was always on a Monday for decades and decades. I think the way it was. But now a couple other businesses around here in this part of town was Pence, Beam, and Forney. They was operating in the 1880s, and they were dealers in agriculture implements and fertilizer. And P.S. Forney, 1894, that would be Peter Forney, that was Dr. Welty Forney, the dentist, that was his father. And agricultural implements, fertilizers, and fire. This is not going to take much longer. You're getting tired of sitting. Now we're going south of the railroad. In other words, we're going across the railroad tracks. And the John Ziegler house, the brick house on the right-hand side, that's still there. John Ziegler moved to Timberville in 1814. He bought the property there in 1816, and I've got the original deed to that property. And he must have been a smart fellow. He started his pottery in 1830, right across the road where Godfather's Pizza sits now. That's where John Ziegler's pottery was at. And then he had a tannery and a hemp mill, and he started a school. In fact, one of John Whalen's histories of Rockingham County, John Whalen mentioned the John Ziegler Schoolhouse in Timberville. And the tannery, when John Ziegler died in 1856, the tannery was the largest tannery in Rockingham County. Now, in the school, I have some of the original documents, just a little piece, but it was, it wouldn't mention the child's name, but they would, the parent would make a deal with John Ziegler, I guess the way he ran his school, he would educate my child for 1 month for $1.50. That's the way he did, and I got about 3 or 4 of those original documents. They're 1830s and 1840s is when that would have been. Now we'll go back across the road where Godfather's Pizza sits. Henry Wright started a marble works and tombstone shop. It's set a little bit further. It had been in behind where the building sits there now, and that building I forgot to tell you. Lester Hoover built that building where Godfather's Pizza is in 1941, and the Standard Oil Company leased it. So that's when that building was built. Now Henry Rife had his tombstone shop, H.A. Rife. You see, he had the tombstone shop there, and his boys took it over in 1909. Mr. Will Rife and Charlie Rife. And Charlie Rife's the one that had our arrowhead collection out here. And Will Rife was one of the old fellows that used to walk the streets of Timberville. He was one of my favorite people. Didn't matter how hot it was, he had this great big wool overcoat on. If some of the people remember that. And but you can go around, I've found the tombstones around the cemeteries all over up here behind the Brethren Church. It's 3 that are pretty close together. You can see it down on the base of it, H.A. Rife. And that was made right down there at the end of the bridge. And there's one down in the Flat Rock Cemetery that's real fancy. And it said in 1909, I think, and it has a Garber on it. It's not me, but one of my people. And it said it took Will Wright 1 month to chisel out that thing, and that's a fancy thing down there. That's down in Flat Rock in Shenandoah County. And now we'll go. My head feels like it's getting ready to explode. We'll go to the Ziegler brothers, and I think they were John Ziegler's sons, Daniel, and I forget the other one's name, but this could have been in the 1880s, I think. And they were the largest dealers of walnut lumber in the state of Virginia. Now we'll go to C.C. Driver. He lived on the other end of the bridge in that brick house over there where Hart Ziegler used to live. That was the C.C. Driver home. And he was operating, I think, in the 1880s and on up past 1900. Anyway, he was shipping over $1 million worth of livestock out to Timberville back in those days. And he had such a business going. I think in 1907, he built a satellite station at the Union Stockyards in Baltimore. That he had such a business going. So he was the largest dealer in livestock in the state of Virginia. Timberville was pretty famous back then. Let's see. I think I covered all. Now this won't take but a couple of minutes more, but it's a couple of the businesses that wasn't actually in Timberville then, but they were operating back then. And we'll just go through this real quick, and then because that cake back there looks pretty good. The Old Folks Home. That was located where Witt's Market sits now, right on that piece of property. Old Folks Home and the Orphans Home, they were both run by the Church of the Brother. Old Folks Home started in 1892, and it stopped operating in 1941. And the Orphans Home was organized in 1905, and they actually built the building in 1909, and that's still up there along the left-hand side of Main Street. And that's shut down in 1938. So I think in 1938 and 1941 area, I think the state kind of came in and started taking care of the children and the old people. I think that's why they closed down. And then going up to where you had the Ziegler's Cannery, started in 1940. And where the town office is now, that building was built in 1944. Howard Ziegler built it for offices for his cannery business. And I think they even had a cafeteria in there at one time where the people could go in and eat. So the Ziegler Cannery, 1940. Shin Valley Meat Packers started somewhere in the middle of the 1940s. The Rockingham Poultry Plant started in 1940. The Mutual Cold Storage started in 1914. And when we get a group of people together, this don't have anything to do with business, so we won't mention the German prisoner of war camp and when Charles Lindbergh landed in Timberville in 1927. And that cake is ready to eat. I'm finished.